Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube and appreciate everybody for listening wherever you are in podcast land. It's NFL draft position rankings time, Sam. Somehow we're going to go through every single position group here today. How you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, ranking season. We're not, it's what, March the 6th. We're just before free agency. So obviously it's draft time.
So here's what we're going to do. I kind of stole this a little bit from DJ and Bucky. I think they do a nice job moving the sticks podcast. They always discuss their top fives. And I marvel sometimes, Sam, at how quickly they can get through it. They'll do, let's just run through our top five. That'll take 20, 25 minutes. And I was like, dude, if we did that, that would take 7 days. But we're going to try today. And it's not going to be necessarily our top fives. We're going to go through the consensus board top fives. And I've been leaning on the consensus board. I like to use NFL mockdraftdatabase.com and their big boards. I've been leaning on these a lot more recently in recent years because I do believe it's just a better analysis of the market. We can add our own opinions and color on top of that, but it's essentially, a conglomeration of everybody, right? And so it's not just one opinion saying, well, I've got this guy at 12, everyone else has him at 90, I love him. We could discuss that type of stuff, but this is a good way of just saying where are the markets really for these position groups. And it's also interesting to see where they rank in the top 100. And in some position groups, there's only a couple players in the top 100 overall.
And inconveniently, or conveniently, depending on how you're using it, this thing updates daily. So if you're listening on a day that isn't Thursday, March the 6th, the numbers or the rankings may be different to what you're hearing. But, this is what it was now.
They might change a little bit by the time you're listening to it, or I don't know if it's like literally throughout the day or if it's just like one change daily, but it takes in all the draft boards, it takes in all the information and then changes it accordingly. You can see where a guy peaked. So it's a really good resource and one I've been leaning on a lot more during draft season the last couple of years. So once again, a reminder, we're both working from home. We have our new studio being built right now, so we'll be in there at some point. Can't wait for the big unveiling of the new Check the Mic studio, but that is a work in progress. And of course, if you're watching and listening and you're not subscribed, what are you doing? We know a big chunk of you are not subscribed. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, do all the things that help the show get out there and grow. We appreciate everybody who's already helped along the way here. Anything else before we go?
Let's go.
Also, check out, we did a little crossover show with our friends at Heed the Call. Long time coming, but it was nice to join them this week.
Yeah, it's on their podcast feed. So if you go search "Heed the Call," you'll find the show. We did a little bit of free agency preview. Talked about both of us leaving our respective previous destinations. So yeah, it was a fun show.
All right, man, let's get into it. We're going to go position by position, go through the top five at all the positions. Here we go. Let's start with quarterback. Cam Ward is the consensus number one right now. I think that, feeds into all of the buzz coming out of Indianapolis. Shedeur Sanders currently on the consensus board at number 4. And then there's the drop-off. And again, I think rumor-wise, we thought this could be condensed a little bit, Shedeur to the next group, but it's Jackson Dart at 39, Jalen Milroe at 48, and then Quinn Ewers at 84. There's some other names to discuss here, but that's the top 5 as of right now on the consensus board. Your thoughts, Sam?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be interested to see if, coming out of the combine, it felt like one of the biggest takeaways was there's a huge gap between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders at the top of this, right? And it's not really a 2 quarterback draft. It's like a 1 quarterback draft. And then there's the debate as to where Sanders ends up going. Does somebody grab him, like the Raiders or the Jets or whatever, that 6-7 range? Does he slide? Does he, some people I've seen, we're starting to get it. And this is always the East German judge, like the outlier. But like there are people out there saying, I don't even have a first round grade on him. Like, what's he doing in the first round at all? So I'm curious, like, will we see this start to switch now? There's a 35 position gap between Shedeur Sanders and Jackson Dart. Does that close with either one of those guys moving, or is it like all the sort of buzz and noise we're hearing is like the East German judge? And actually the consensus is much more the way it always was before this.
All right. I got some things to unpack here, Sam. We already have. Now look, last year, 2 years ago, wasn't our boss at the time, Mike T, our current boss. He was the one throwing like Hendon Hooker in the first round. It was like, I know you're talking about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, but if you considered Hendon Hooker at 6 overall, like, you
Right.
know, anybody considered this yet? There'll always be a few outliers here. Hooker ended up going in the third round that particular year.
Remember Malik Willis, like number 2 overall talk?
And we're starting to get that. So now, friend of the show and another colleague here at the 33rd team, Charles Davis, I believe he was the first one who just threw the 1, 2, 3 mock draft in there. The whole QBs are going to go 1, 2, and 3 with
Wow.
Jackson Dart going 3. So look, eyes open, head on a swivel. We're going to see a lot of those things. And I still feel like there's more rumblings that this draft class is closer to 2022, the Kenny Pickett class, where the Malik Willis stuff did happen, right? There's 4 or 5 quarterbacks who we think are the best. It was Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Sam Howell, Desmond Ritter, all those names. And it was like, well, quarterbacks are desperate. They're going to go in the first round. This class might be better than that class, but I'm not sure I'm ready to put all these QBs up in the first. I think there's still enough people that think, I don't feel great about even Cam Ward as a top quarterback. I don't think people feel as good about Cam Ward as many of the quarterback prospects over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and there's also the disparity between what the outside world believes and what the NFL believes, right? And we're not going to know that until draft time. And even then, we only really know what one NFL team thinks relative to the consensus, right? Like when a guy gets taken significantly before the consensus, all we really know is that one team disagrees with the consensus, not necessarily that the entire NFL felt differently about that guy. So for that, you don't need to go back any further than last year. The final consensus ranking was Michael Penix Jr., 25 overall. And Bo Nix, interestingly, ended up below Penix with 32 overall, right? So both those guys were seen as bottom of the first round, top of the second round guys, and they end up going at 8 and 12 for Bo Nix. So, we're looking at these guys, Jackson Dart, for example, most obviously 39 overall. The NFL might have him 25 spots higher, or an NFL team who needs a quarterback might have him worth 25 spots higher or whatever, and still, a solid first round player. So who the hell knows?
Great answer. I know you're a Shedeur Sanders fan. Generally, I know you've liked his game. I'm, as you can imagine, torn, fence sitting on Shedeur. I'm back and forth on him. Every time I see something good, I'm like, and the only thing I could try to do there is like remind myself of previous vibes when watching film. You're going to hate this one, but those were like the Mitch Trubisky vibes I got when I watched, and I ended up liking Trubisky as a whole, as a prospect on the whole. But like, there was times I was like, all right, yes, that's great. That's good stuff. And then other times I'm like, oh, that scares me. I don't like the way Mitch in particular handled the blitz, handled this or that. Shedeur, every time he makes a really nice throw off platform, off schedule, I'm like, oh, there's a bad one off platform, off schedule. And he's off schedule a lot. That offensive line is as bad as advertised. And I think it maybe created some bad habits. And I think that's going to be a tricky part of the Shedeur Sanders evaluation. Of course, the other tricky part is all of the off-field. And I'm not saying that from a character perspective, but he grew up with Deion, right? He's out there calling out coaches after games and everything, right? There's a whole different attitude that Shedeur brings to the table than most, and a whole different life experience that Shedeur brings to the table than most. And we already heard rumblings that he turned off some teams in interviews. And I'm not saying that's true or false or whatever, but like, remember, there's going to be 32 team opinions out there. So absolutely, I could see that some teams are turned off by whatever they saw or heard from Shedeur.
There's also, Rich Eisen kind of made this point, and Eisen, knows the Sanderses, right? He's obviously worked with Deion for years and knew Shedeur when he was a child, right? So he was kind of making the point of, look, the idea that he might have turned off some teams. Like, remember the famous story of Deion where he was asked to go through like testing pre-combine or pre-draft with some teams and was like, where do you pick? They're like 10. It's like, I'm going to be gone by then. I don't have time for this crap. And just got up and walked out, right? Like, now that, like, in abstract terms, is like a terrible attitude for this sort of whole process. But he was right? He was going to be long gone before they picked. So it didn't matter that he was like turning that team off, and who cares? And when you're great, like when you have stupid high-end talent and it does, like, none of that stuff matters. I don't know that Shador has that, right? So if he's, and I don't even know if this is happening, but if he is taking that from Dion or being coached in that way by Dion to be like, forget that team, right? Don't even give them the time of day, right? Like if that's happening, I don't know that he has the same like fallback of like I'm guaranteed to go in the top 5 picks. I'm a future Hall of Famer. Like I am an unparalleled talent, the likes of which this league hasn't seen in years. That would be, I think, potentially a problem if he's bringing that sort of Dion like primetime attitude to the table, even just because like he's a quarterback. I mean, their bust rate is just so much higher than that. I don't know if anybody could get away with doing that, but that would be a little bit concerning if he's sort of bringing that type of um, behavior, attitude, like the way of dealing with things to the table. Cause I don't think he has that guarantee the way Dion did of like, that dude's going to be a superstar, whatever happens.
Yeah.
Um, Overall, like I agree, there's a lot to be scared of from his tape, but I don't, my question is simply how much of that is everything around him, right? The offense, the offensive line. I don't think a lot of those, like the receiving core he was throwing to was good. Pretty much everything else was not. So that's always a factor when you're talking about, how much of what we're looking at is a inherent concerning trait and how much of it is just the situation they were in. I think there's a lot of good in his tape, and the stuff that's bad or scary, I agree is bad or scary, but I don't know how much of that is the things around him. And that's why this is always guesswork, right? Is projecting those things.
I can't wait to have our friend JT O'Sullivan on the show. He's already putting out some Shador Sanders takes. He just dropped his notes onto Twitter the other day. I love when people just put scouting notes on there. Not even the summation, just the notes, like everything you saw along the way. Love seeing that. We'll have JT, I'm sure, on here at some point during draft season to get his take on it. So yeah, look, I think bottom line for Shador too. I don't even know if it's him out there saying, "Oh, I'm a future Hall of Famer."
Right.
Again, I think I go back and forth between he's over there calling out Matt Rule for disrespecting them. It's like, did you really have to do that? That felt like a negative. Then he comes back and he's over there at the Heisman Trophy ceremony with Travis Hunter, saying like, "This dude's my best friend. He's the best player in the nation." Talking him up, just being a real leadership type qualities, right? So again, much like his film, it's like every time, oh, this is good, but then there's a yeah, but this other thing happened. So even from what you see from Shador, I feel like you can go back and forth on those things.
And that second thing I think is way more important than the first. Like I'm
Yeah.
far more, my concern with Shador would be given his background, given his, lifestyle as Deion Sanders' kid and this sort of guy that's been handpicked and coached by Deion and brought everywhere. And it's like, you take over Colorado and it's like, hey guys, pack your bags. I'm bringing the Louis Vuitton suitcases with me. Like Shador's coming. You guys can all get the hell out of here. I would be concerned as an NFL team, did that breed an attitude of, superiority, like entitlement, that kind of stuff? And will that turn off teammates? Now, if it doesn't, if actually he's been able to do that, and maybe that causes this kind of like, I'm going to go join with opposing coaches. I don't really care about that. But if teammates love him and if he's there for teammates and those guys see him as one of the guys and not, entitled and an air above and all those kinds of things, like an arrogant attitude, I don't really care about the other stuff. That falls into the category of the stuff that Baker Mayfield did, right? Where I kind of actually like that. It's more interesting than quarterbacks that are just, I'm always going to say the right thing at the right time and never piss anybody off. Like, who cares? If you want to go join with an opposing coach, knock yourself out. Just make sure that you're good. Otherwise, you're going to look like an idiot.
Just to touch on some of the other guys here, we mentioned Jackson Dart at 39, Jalen Milroe 48, and then the drop off to Quinn Ewers at 84. I'm surprised Tyler Shook from Louisville is not a little bit higher. He's up at 92 right now on the consensus board, actually behind at 7 overall on the quarterback list here. Will Howard at 6 at 89. I think Shook's going to get a little bit more of the a little bit more hype. You have a lot more film people saying, "Oh, I like this guy." His only issue is that he's 25. I don't even think the age thing is really an issue unless you're doing statistical analysis. That's always my take on it. If you're comparing his stats at 24 in the ACC compared to others, okay, that makes sense. But if you're just comparing the film and will this guy be in the league for 10 plus years as a potential starter, yeah, like it's not an issue. So surprised he's not a little higher. But it's an interesting class of maybe a developmental guy like him, a Dylan Gabriel who's 8th on the overall list, Kyle McCord who's 9th. It's a big breadth of evaluators nowadays that have access to film and that can put their takes out there. There'll be small hives for the Dylan Gabriels, Kyle McCords of the world. So you'll hear plenty of people that like some of these individuals in that second wave of QBs.
Yeah, and obviously the clear thing still is like from the consensus ranking so far, it's 1, 2, and then there's chaos because the third guy
Yeah.
is mostly Jackson Dart, but there's a huge gap, and it's kind of everybody's flavor after that. The Jackson Dart thing is interesting though, because number one, there's a ton of people that kind of liked him already. Number two, everywhere we go, you hear Jackson Dart's having an incredible performance, right? The Senior Bowl, there were a ton of people who had him as like the winner of the week. The combine, people were like, he lit it up in the workouts. None of that's translating yet to like a significant jump in the consensus rankings. Like he hasn't moved into this Kenny Pickett range of like in the 20s, like clear first round guy. Somebody's going to come back for him. Somebody's going to draft him higher. So far, the consensus still kind of has him as, he is a way behind the other two. He is a second round guy, not a first round guy. And maybe he's solidified himself as QB3, but not necessarily making inroads on QBs 1 and 2. And then Jalen Milroe, obviously, his stock's got to be on the rise because he managed to stretch his hand out like about an inch or whatever between the Senior Bowl and the combine. So all good for Jalen Milroe.
An unbelievable process. It is an unbelievable process here, Sam. Last thing I want to touch on the quarterbacks before we get to running backs. Again, very lukewarm take here on quarterbacks. Nobody knows anything about quarterbacks. I think if you're overconfident on your evaluations, you're probably not right unless you do have a legitimate track record. I think it should be treated differently than other positions because it is treated differently. The expectations are different. Success is measured differently. You're not just looking for a starter. Kenny Pickett was a starting quarterback in the NFL, and I don't know, is Kenny Pickett one of the top 32 starters in the world? He might be. But is Daniel Jones one of the top 32 starters in the world? Absolutely he is. Was that a hit for the Giants? It's tough to say that it was. So right. That's the problem, right? You're not just looking for a starter. At every other position, you could say, this guy starts, he's in my lineup, he might not be elite, but he's good enough, right? You can't do that at quarterback. And because of that, it is very challenging to look back and find all the people that knew Mahomes and Herbert and Allen and Lamar and every single one that they were all going to be right. Jaden Daniels, these guys were atop everybody's board. We knew it, and there's no misses in there. I don't think anybody has that. So don't act like you do. Don't act like somebody has better answers than the other, and come at this with teams have to take calculated risks at this position, and it's okay to miss. It's okay to, not be right about a guy because it's a challenging position given the high standard.
And it also, I think, is because now you are chasing special. You're not just chasing viability, a guy that can just occupy the seat for a while. You're chasing somebody that can be in a game against Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson and give you a chance to win that game. That's why, number one, you're going to see, I think, most people gravitate towards Cam Ward over Shedeur Sanders because it's easier to see the special traits that he has, right? He's got a better arm. He's got better athleticism. You can see those things, and that, like, it's just easier to go, well, that guy, therefore, has higher upside. Whereas a guy like Shedeur, who needs to win from the Joe Burrow bucket of talent, right? Like the anticipation, the good enough physically, but special mentally world, that's harder to evaluate and harder to see. Number one, you're going to see people, I think, more often lean towards the guy with the tools. Number two, it potentially creates this world where it's actually having a negative effect on your ability to evaluate quarterbacks, right? Because you are automatically trying to chase the guy with traits as opposed to the guy that you think is just a better player overall. So you're going to go chasing the guys with special arms or special athletic talents because it's easier to see and you think they have a higher potential. And that might actually lead to a worse strike rate than if you were just saying, who's the best quarterback, 1, 2, 3. So again, quarterback will always remain a nightmare.
Shout out to Harry, my intern, got me my coffee delivery here.
I don't have that. I don't have that at all.
So, all right, well, benefit of homeschool over here. My kid can make coffee for me.
Nice.
So yeah, that's I'll repeat my quarterback takes quite a bit, I'm sure. And you and I will have our rankings. It'll be fun. I mean, rankings are fun and everything, and you guys can, still make fun of us for not believing in CJ Stroud enough or whatever it may have been from a couple years ago. But I will always caveat this with I don't feel strongly about anything quarterback related. I've been burnt enough and I'm smart enough to not have strong feelings. And if you have strong feelings, I encourage you, maybe you shouldn't, unless you can show me the previous track record where like you're the man and you don't miss on QBs. So we'll have our own QB rankings on a later show. Anything else at the QB position, Sam, before we go to running backs?
No, I think that's pretty much the overview.
All right, going position by position here, NFL draft rankings. We're using the consensus board and just kind of talking through. We'll unveil some of our rankings as we get closer to the draft, but this is more of a market analysis, what the people are saying, what the analysts are saying. So the running back position, we have Ashton Genty at number 8 overall, the top running back by far, the only one in the top 32. We got UNC's Omarion Hampton at 34, Ohio State's Travion Henderson at 45. Iowa's Caleb Johnson at 62, and then Ohio State's Quinshon Judkins at 65. Hampton is the one guy at 34, getting more and more first-round hype. We're seeing him sneak into more first-round mocks, whether it's the Chargers, other teams in the 20s, whereas clearly we know that Ashton Genty is the top guy at number 8 on the consensus, and I still believe someone in the top 10. Could be the Bears now, the way they're building the offensive line. Somebody's going to take Genty in that top 10.
Not just more and more first round buzz for Hampton, but you're starting to see the RB1 takes out there, the way it was when and these, I mean, with hindsight or retrospectively, like looking back now, Jahmyr Gibbs versus Bijan Robinson, right? Robinson was the clear RB1 that year. Every now and again, you would find one guy going, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is the best running back in this class. And like at the time, it's like, that's crazy. Now, I mean, they both look pretty good, but at the very minimum, you couldn't say definitively Bijan's been the better NFL player than Gibbs. So I'm a little bit leery of being like, anyone putting Hampton above Genty is nuts based off, what we know so far. But like, Genty's a special prospect. I understand you're dealing like his only criticism, or not even criticism, the only thing you could pick apart his prospect profile with is Boise State, right? He did it at Boise State. He didn't do it in the SEC. So, whatever his numbers are, whatever his production, performance, et cetera is, we need to take that down by a percentage. Now, how much the percentage is up for debate, but there's a lot of percentage to be able to take it down before you put somebody else ahead of Ashton Genty.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. He's a friend of the show as well, and I have his signed Sharpie. So Ashton Genty is going to remain RB1 for Check the Mic for the foreseeable future. Give me a pen. I mean, it's like I was there. It's like being there at the game. I wasn't there to see Ashton Genty in person, but might as well have been. Yeah, I think he's a special player. I think he can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. I think he can run any scheme. I thought the games against better competition, like 20 missed tackles or whatever against Penn State when he had no running room, I feel like that's more of a positive than a negative. We know that running backs have trouble creating production on their own. We know that that's true. And so maybe the yards per carry weren't necessarily there, but they spent their entire game plan, Penn State, trying to, bottle up Ashton Genty. So I thought he was pretty impressive in those games. And I like him as an RB1. I think he has a Bijan level of prospect. You're right, though. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs has been as good as Bijan Robinson, if not better. So with all these rankings, right, nothing's ever set in stone. I was given all those caveats for the quarterback position. That applies almost anywhere, right? We don't know absolutely everything. I think Bijan's been fantastic, by the way, too. Gibbs has just brought that special level of burst, big playability, and he's also in a better situation in Detroit. Bijan's in a good situation in Atlanta, but certainly not as good as what Jahmyr Gibbs has been, and as more of a role player than Bijan has been. So just to go back to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, overarching themes for this running back group. Number one, it's a really good class. Like, not just these guys in the top 5, but you can keep going and get to some really good players inside the top 100. This is like a really, really strong running back group. Genty, like, number one, I think you're right. Special talent. I can't think of too many players that have made what they do look as easy as Genty does. Like, there's an effortlessness to his game that's insane. Like, it doesn't look like he's trying, and yet he still makes people bounce off him. Once the guy bounces off him, it's just a slight move to the right to space, and away he goes. And the acceleration is easy. He makes everything look so easy, and it's not. Like, what he's doing is difficult and looks like it should be taking significantly more effort to achieve than he does. He's another guy that I don't really care what he tests like. I don't really care what his numbers are. Like 40-time jumps, it on tape, it looks easy. And that to me is like more important. I don't think Boise State is such a low level of competition that you have to be like, wow, is this only happening because he's up against FCS athletes? Like, he's clearly good enough of an athlete to make this work.
I want to talk about some of these other players. I mentioned Hampton, speed and big playability that he has. I think he's a better zone runner than a gap runner. I was surprised at how much I really liked Travion Henderson. I'll keep repeating that as well. After just watching him as a college football player, it was like, all right, big playability, big playability. I was impressed with just how much he maximized yardage as a runner as well and had that big playability. So I thought Travion Henderson impressed me again more than I expected. Similar with Caleb Johnson, he ran in the 4.5s while everyone else is blowing up the combine and seemingly running fast this year, whether it was running backs, wide receivers, DBs, everyone was running fast. Caleb Johnson of Iowa did not run that fast, but he's an impressive player. I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, forget the 40 on him as well. Really good player. It reminded me a little bit of Joe Mixon, the way he runs and is just this smooth zone runner. I think certain teams are going to absolutely love Caleb Johnson and maybe put him certainly above Travion right now, as just like a pure zone runner for their system, which I get. And I see the chat talking Scattaboo, Cam Scattaboo. He is now at 7 on the consensus board for running backs, number 84 overall. That's another one of my guys. Like, I want that dude on my team. What I don't understand, I know he runs over dudes and, breaks tackles, and he's got great strength, but he's not a great cutter. He's not explosive necessarily. But I don't understand. There's a Ron Dane comp in the chat here.
Comp?
Yeah, somebody said he's Ron Dane and he's Mike Alstott comps, and I'm like, no, he's like he's not a fullback, right? He breaks tackles like an old school fullback, but he's not a fullback. And Scattaboo, I think he's going to be a steal if he goes in say the 3rd round.
Scattaboo to Ron Dane is one of the worst player comps I've ever heard in my life. Like,
no offense to Eddie. No offense to Eddie in the chat here. No offense. I'm just saying.
That's egregious. I mean, that's awful. And this is in a world where you're like, look, player comps can be used for a variety of different things, right? Are we talking stylistically? Are we talking quality of career? Like, what are we talking? But in almost every conceivable way, Scattaboo to Ron Dane is not good.
He's listed at 5'11", 215. What was his? What did he weigh in at?
219, is that right?
Yeah, 5'10", 219. And he continues to get comps to these big bruising fullbacks. The testing's interesting on Scattaboo. I mean, if he felt like a 4.6 guy on
the
film.
Jumps were crazy good though.
But 96th percentile vert, 82nd percentile broad jump, showing some of that explosiveness. I mean, he's just that guy. Kareem Hunt was great contact balance and tough to tackle coming out. I just think he's going to be good, man. I just think he's going to be a productive NFL player, and I think that's the depth of this class. There's some DJ Giddens fans who's at 8 on the consensus board. Devin Neal from Kansas, Giddens from Kansas State, Neal from Kansas. There's some depth in this class. Bashal Tutin, who's 11 on the consensus board, ran a 4.32 at the combine here. So there's some depth in this class.
And had a 40+ inch vertical. Like, it was the highest vertical. So there were a few guys that really showed up as impressive athletes, like Amari Hampton and Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. Those guys both put like high-end running back numbers, the kind of workouts that Breece Hall did when he solidified himself as one of the top running backs in that class. And honestly, they feel into that kind of category, those sort of prototype size, speed, explosiveness type backs. Hampton, I think, better than Judkins at this point, but similarly athletic profile show that they can be that guy. I think you're right. Scatterboo at this point, I honestly, he shouldn't run like at all. Don't even bother unless you're like confident that you can run something good. I wouldn't even put it on. I wouldn't even put a number out there. Like if it's not going to be a 4.5 or better, I wouldn't even run it because at this point you've shown you're explosive and you're built like an absolute monster and your tape is amazing. Just let that speak for itself. Don't even allow people to pick apart your 40 time for all the relevance it's going to have. But again, like this is, I think, going to be a really good, deep running back class.
Almost every, I mean, I think 20 teams are going to come away with at least one running back that's going to be like in their top 2 on their depth chart. I mean, maybe that's extreme, but there's a lot of running backs available and running back needy teams. You know, even a team like the Vikings who only have a handful of picks, it's going to be tough for them to not come away with a running back in this class because of the depth. Guys like RJ Harvey, a little bit lower at UCF. I saw the chat mention Damian Martinez from Miami. I think those are the types of guys who go higher in other years. The other weird fit that I'm just going to throw out there, I mentioned Seattle as a team. I would love to see them have a pass catching running back to kind of take, especially in the red zone, to take a little pressure off Geno Smith. As I was watching film of Jaden Blue from Texas the other day, I was thinking that would be a great fit. He ran in the 4.3s. They already have Ken Walker. They have Zach Charbonnet, pass catching back Jaden Blue. So you have those guys that are not gimmick players, but, you know, specific role type of players in this class as well. Blue can do that. Brashard Smith is a wide receiver conversion who played running back last year at SMU, who could fit that bill. So again, there's every down backs. Stylistically, there's all sorts of different types of backs and a couple of those explosive receiving backs as well. Great. I can usually read you, Sam. You know, it's harder I can usually read when you have one more thing to say, one more way to recap it, you know? And sometimes, I missed it.
Sometimes nothing there.
It's a miss. I mean, that's what I keep saying. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect here. All right, let's go to receivers. This is going to be an interesting one. We'll put Travis Hunter on the list here. He's at 3 overall on the consensus board. Teterow and McMillan still at 7, despite some dwindling hype coming out of the combine. I think it's just a lot of out of sight, out of mind, right? Why are people not feeling great about Ashton Genty and Cam Scatterboo and Tet McMillan? We just didn't see them run, right? We didn't see them. Out of sight, out of mind. Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State at 26. Matthew Golden from Texas, only at 28 right now. That's going to be on the rise. And Alec Ayomenor from Stanford, a drop off to 52 right here. I'm going to throw another name in there in a minute, but it all changed. I'm reading the wrong document. I see what happened here. Thank you. Let me do this again. Travis Hunter at 3, Tet McMillan at 7, Luther Burden from Missouri at 25, Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State at 26, Texas's Matthew Golden at 28. There we go. We didn't update the document I'm reading.
Nice work. Let me ask you a question as GM Steve.
Yeah.
If you were building your draft big board or your draft board or however you're putting things out there pre-draft, how would you treat Travis Hunter?
I would rank him as both cornerback and receiver. I mean, on the board, like I would rank him in both categories.
Right.
And then I would get my team together as the GM, and we would have a conversation about how to value that and then build a plan, our best plan for how we would want to use him. And then we would, talk to him, see if our plan meshes with him. If he has buy-in there, come back out of that and have a plan and then say, okay, how do we value that? Because I'm calling him 1.5 players, not 2 players. I'll call him 1.5. And 1.5 players as a top 2 receiver and a top 2 corner, that's probably the best non-quarterback in the draft, right? So that's how I'm going to value him.
So on the Hari board, the horizontal draft board, you've got him ranked in both spots, right? You've got him ranked as your receiver and as your cornerback in each one of those columns. And then you're putting together some kind of overall big draft board. You're just ranking him wherever as a composite player.
Yeah, I would have some way of communicating the composite of receiver and corner, which for me would put him above Abdul Carter and Mason. It would put him above all those non-quarterbacks for sure.
Right.
Why?
So I think because Travis Hunter, I think, breaks the programming for however it works at NFL mock draft database.com, because he's not technically listed at wide receiver. But I think that's simply because he is listed at cornerback. He is the number 3 player on the overall big board, though, and that would put him above Tet McMillan. Coming out of the combine, that was the story, right? It's like everybody I spoke to except Trevor Sikkema had Travis Hunter wide receiver 1, had wide receiver Travis Hunter as the best receiver in this draft above Tet McMillan. Trev has McMillan as the number 1 guy, but I think that's the correct order. Well, to me, it's the correct order, and that seems to be the consensus as well, that Hunter is the top guy.
Yeah, I mean, I could buy into that. I mean, your take that he's playing fatigued. Think about what he could do if he's not fatigued. I mean, those are real questions that we would have to sort out if we're in a front office, Sam, right? You have to figure out what's the best way to maximize him. And I really think a lot of Hunter's usage is going to come down to where he goes, right? If he's with the Giants and you need a wide receiver 2 next to Malik Neighbors, or if you're in New England and if they don't make a move in free agency or all these released receivers, like they need a wide receiver 1, there's going to be some teams that want him as wide receiver 1 and also see him as wide receiver 1. And I think the current depth chart is going to determine what he does. It's just harder to just be a nickel corner. I mean, you could do it. You just have fewer situations where Travis Hunter's an outside corner and you have a guy that you're going to give Travis Hunter a breather, and you have a guy that's going to play outside on early downs and then go play nickel, in the slot on third down, and Hunter's going to step in as an outside corner. It's just harder to do that than it is to put a wide receiver package together with him as a starting corner.
The other problem with that way around, I think, is you are at the mercy of an opposition effectively changing their personnel packages to keep you on the field, right? So if you have him as a full-time corner who plays some wide receiver, you can determine when he comes off the field and has a breather, right? Like you can play him X number of snaps. He can be on a pitch count. And if he's playing too much, you just take him off the field. Simple. There's nothing stopping you, right? If you have him as your nickel corner, for example, or even your dime corner, and he's out there and you sort of project that overall based off, last season's evidence, that puts him on the field X snaps over the season, right? Or X snaps per game. But if a team knows that, like, this is what we do, this is the package that Travis Hunter plays, and we want to get him on the field all the time to make him tired, we just run 11 personnel all game, right? We might not be an 11 personnel team normally, but if we know that's how we keep Travis Hunter on the field every snap and make him exhausted by the third or fourth quarter, we're just going to play 11 personnel all game. And now you have to go, well, now he's on the field already like twice as much as we were expecting him to be. Now we need a different way of getting him off the field. And suddenly we got to sub in a guy who's not our nickel corner. That's the risk with that way around. Whereas the other way around, it's like you control when he comes off the field.
Reminds of early Von Miller career, right? When he was playing Sam linebacker against base offenses. But that's not a pass rushing position, right? He's just playing Sam linebacker, which doesn't even exist in today's NFL. The lexicon, so it doesn't even exist. You can kind of
trap a guy either on the field or in a position you don't want him to be if you're reactive because of the way defense is. I also think, look, everyone's going to be so focused on like how to maximize this value of Travis Hunter because it's such an unusual thing. I think there are going to be several teams that just don't care about that. Like, it's in college, the maximizing Travis Hunter was also the best thing for Colorado, right? Because he's their best player. I don't think that's going to be true necessarily in the NFL, where like the theoretical maximum impact or value that Travis Hunter can have might not be the same thing as what is the best for team X, who just needs a wide receiver or just needs a cornerback, right? Like, I think there are going to be several teams, plenty, in fact, who look at him and go, I don't care about this like fancy ancillary, two-way thing. Like, he's just the best receiver in the draft to us. And if in a pinch we could use him like, Troy Brown, who had to moonlight at corner, or, Mike Furry back in the day, it's like, we need a emergency stop. Like, fair enough. But I don't have a huge amount of interest in like, let's figure out how to make this weird two-way thing work. Like, it doesn't necessarily help that team who also already has like a good nickel or whatever.
I am interested in it. I not just because we see Shohei Ohtani doing it. By the way, he's trying to say that what he's doing is not more difficult than what Shohei's doing. By the way, being able to hit and pitch, I mean, completely different skill sets. I know corner and receiver are too, but what Shohei's doing at the level that he's doing it, I think was out of this world more difficult. But that's just my take on it.
Yeah, this
You
is
have an
like
opinion?
my opinion is that the entire argument is idiotic, shouty show like fodder.
I
Like
jumped in.
this is the
Just
type
dove
of
head first.
discussion that only takes place on First Take and has no business being on this
What's
show.
more difficult,
Right.
baseball or
Like,
football? Who's a
you
better
were
athlete?
talking about two things that are like uniquely impossible to achieve and have been done by one player in the last 65 years or whatever. Nobody has any business debating which one is more difficult to do than the other one.
Did it.
It is utterly absurd as a concept to even try an attempt, is my take on that.
I just did it. I just jumped in. Anyway, I am interested in maximizing that. I am interested in the unique ability to have 1.5 players and almost 2 players for the price of one. I am fascinated by that. So GM Steve would try to make that work as much as possible.
Like, to be clear, I'm incredibly interested in seeing it happen and trying to like push the boundaries as much as possible just to see what he can do, right? In the world of like Ohtani. Like at one point, somebody was like, there's no way that can ever happen. It's ridiculous. And then it's like, actually, he might be able to do it. Let's give it a shot. I'm all for seeing what Travis Hunter can do at the next level. I just think there are going to be several NFL teams that don't care and are like, we are just treating him like he literally, like we talked about, right? He's ranked in each spot on the horizontal board. We need a wide receiver right now. We don't need a corner. We are just treating him as the best wide receiver in this draft. And that's it. And he just comes in. We're like, hey, great, incredible college career, Heisman Trophy. Well done. You are, however, now just our top receiver.
All right, let's discuss some of these other guys here. Ted McMillan, I don't think should be falling the way he does. He didn't run. I understand maybe some questions about his speed. It was the one question I have. I don't know how explosive he is. I don't know if he's got the burst off the line. I think he's good at everything else. For a guy that's 6'3", 6'4", sinks his hips in and out of routes, ball skills, he can play big slot. He can win on the outside. I don't want to overthink, McMillan. The next group is interesting. I think the Jaden Higgins buzz. I just put this out there on Twitter. We first to market, Sam. I think we were first to market Jaden Higgins in the first round. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to hear more of that. Big receiver in a world where there's not a ton of these big-bodied receivers available in this class, and he ran in the 4.4s, ran well enough, right? There's a 4 in the second number in his 40, not a 5, right?
Which for his size is huge.
Which is absolutely huge. And he's just a really good football player. So I think he's currently in the 70s on the consensus board, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9th overall among receivers. I think that's going to start rising. He's at 70 right now. Your guy, Jalen Royals, is at 10 on the consensus board. I could see him rising. I think that second wave of receivers is going to be interesting. Jack Besh is at 67 overall. Isaiah Bond is at 68. I don't know where he's going to actually land with all of the character concerns that we heard about Isaiah Bond coming out of the combine and everything, but he actually moves like the 4.3 that Matthew Golden ran. So it's going to be an interesting second wave, I think, of receivers here.
Yeah, well, because immediately, I think I think most people feel pretty good about the top 2. Even if you don't love Ted McMillan, you like him. Like, I don't think there's anyone out there that's going to be like, this guy's not going to make it. He's not good. Don't want any part of him. It's like you might just not love him relative to a year ago, with those top 3 wide receivers, each of whom I think would be wide receiver 1 in this draft. But you like him. Once you get beyond those 2 guys, though, then you start to get into this. Like, just look at those 3 guys there that are 2, 3, or 3, 4, and 5 on the current consensus board. Like Luther Burden is this incredible yards after the catch guy. We comped into Odell Beckham, Giants Odell Beckham, LSU Odell Beckham in terms of what he does with the ball in his hands. But there's a lot more projection in terms of where he plays, what he does as a route running wide receiver. Can he play outside? Is he just a slot guy, etc.? Ibuka is this kind of big slot guy. as well. Matthew Golden is, apparently really fast, but doesn't necessarily show up on tape. There's a lot of projection involved in some of these guys, and then once you get beyond that, it's not much more clear. So yeah, I think like last year, once you got kind of beyond that first wave of wide receiver, it was very, very movable just in terms of what you're looking for, the type of receiver you're trying to find, where you have the need, the hole to fill. I think you're going to see the same thing this year.
Yeah, a couple other names just to throw out there. Jalen, we're going to go with Noel today. The latest. I'm back and forth between Noel and Noel. We've heard both.
Yeah.
I heard Dane Brugler said Noel, and I like to defer to what Dane says. I think Dane is the pronunciation authority when it comes to the NFL draft. So I'll go with that. Iowa State's Jalen Noel. Closest thing to Ladd McConkey in this draft. Speed and quicks. That's what I don't think he's as good as McConkey. I thought McConkey was an outstanding receiver, and then, oh, by the way, looked like he was on fast forward the way he played football. Noel's the closest thing to that. Xavier Restrepo's not fast from Miami, but I think he's got a chance to be really good. Tez Johnson didn't run fast as far as his 40 goes, but I think he still has a chance to be really good. Then you have a guy like Savion Williams, 6'3", 225 from TCU that was playing some running back for them, but needs some polish as a receiver. There are some interesting day 2, maybe even into day 3 receivers in this class who I think can make an impact. Not as deep as last year, or you didn't. Last year it felt like you could get some good players, in the 70s, 80s, 90s at receiver. I think it's similar, maybe not as strong overall, but I think it's a similar class. Torrey Horton coming off of injury from Colorado State. There's a bunch of names in this top 15, I think, that might, have a chance to make an impact. So I like this receiver class more than most. It's just not top heavy like it's been in recent years.
Yeah, I don't think it's great. I still think you're going to get plenty of good players. I mean, even going down, like Jimmy Horn Jr. is number 178 on the overall big board, the overall consensus rankings. I mean, he was the guy that kept hitting the fastest numbers miles per hour wise during the drills at the combine, fastest gauntlet they had. And he's a pretty slick receiver in his own right. So, like, I think there's going to be some good players. Restrepo cracks me up just in terms of what he measured at. That guy legitimately has like one of the closest comps to him in terms of height weight combination is Barry Sanders. I mean, he's built like a running back, not a wide receiver.
He's got good feel for the position too. I mean, it's like your classic slot receiver and everything, but knows how to get open, adjust to the ball. I think he's going to be good.
I mean, he's 209 pounds at 5'9". That's crazy.
Isn't that what Vernon Hargraves came in at? Like 5'10", 203.
Right, with all this fake weight.
Yeah, bunch of fake weight. Anything else on the receiver class?
No, other than I agree with you. I think it's better than people. I think it's because like the gap of sort of talent perception wise is like in the first round. You get to those guys you're drafting at the top, and then you get the guys that are going to sneak into the bottom of the first round. But it's that like there's nobody necessarily that you really like in that like 10 to 25 range. And I think that's kind of how we judge talent sometimes in a draft. It's like, well, where are all the guys that belong in the middle of the first round? And if there aren't any, it's a weak draft. But I actually think the depth is pretty good at this receiver group. It's just that you don't love it if you're trying to get a wide receiver and you pick 18.
I see the chat mentioned Kyle Williams from Washington State. Our friend Mike Renner loves Kyle Williams, had a nice Senior Bowl, moves extremely well. He's only at 151 overall. That's around 15 to 20 on the consensus board among receivers right now. I could see him being on the rise over these next few weeks here. Let's go to tight end. A couple guys listed in the first round here. Tyler Warren from Penn State, Colston Loveland from Michigan. They're at 10 and 22 overall, respectively. LSU's Mason Taylor's making a move right now. He's at number 3 among tight ends, 59 on the consensus board. Elijah Arroyo from Miami at 60, and then Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green at number 63. I think coming out of, just this offseason generally, Mason Taylor, Elijah Arroyo, they're both making moves between Senior Bowl, workouts. Harold Fannin Jr., unbelievably productive at Bowling Green, but you get the small school thing, weighing in the 240s, runs a 4.7. I think he expected a little bit more from that, even though some other things around that were good. But yeah, some tight ends I think that can come in and make an impact.
Yeah, and like if you like quarterback, right? It's like a clear 1-2, and then like tight end 3 is up for debate very tightly. I mean, to the point where they flipped in the consensus rankings between putting these things down on paper yesterday and the graphic going up on screen today. Mason Taylor, I think, jumped 2 of those guys, Arroyo and Fannin, to get up to the third spot. So I think Tyler Warren is like a special talent. That guy jumps off the tape. Any Penn State tape you watch, Tyler Warren looks spectacular. I think Colson Loveland is really good. And then this next group is like, I think, a group of talented receiving tight ends that appear to all be kind of enhancing their stock in the offseason. Mason Taylor from LSU, Arroyo from Miami, but even going down, like Terrence Ferguson, I think, impressed a lot of people between the Senior Bowl and the Combine. Was sort of the guy leading the way, maybe in terms of the next group of tight ends after those top 2 guys who didn't run. And that was an interesting dynamic at the Combine, that neither Tyler Warren nor Colson Loveland did anything, essentially. So they kind of opened the door for those next wave guys to go, okay, who's gonna impress and try and seize that opportunity of, showcasing something when the top 2 guys aren't there.
And even beyond those guys, the next couple, Gunnar Helm, who we mentioned had the injury that he played through and had a terrible workout numbers wise. Hopefully he'll get a chance to work out at Pro Day. Terrence Ferguson opened some eyes, I think, from Oregon, was a pretty solid player there, and he's number 7 on the board there. So there are some tight ends in this class. At the top, it is interesting with Tyler Warren. He's at 10 overall on the consensus board. And again, comparing to Brock Bowers, the most recent guy that we saw, I think Bowers was in his own special world as a prospect. So I don't know that Tyler Warren is there, but he does pop every time you see him. You saw Penn State with playmakers everywhere, by the way, 2 really good running backs, and they were still feeding him the ball out of the backfield. So Tyler Warren is a very good player, but he didn't run in part because I think, some of the questions are his pure speed, long speed.
I was just trying to work out what order do they do? Do they do the 3-cone first in terms of workouts of the
I
combine?
don't know. I'm not sure.
Because Gunnar Helm, like the one drill he has, it's really good, is the 3-cone. I'm like, if the
Yeah.
dude ran a good 3-cone with a busted ankle, that's pretty freaky. I assume that happened before he rolled his ankle.
They do the jumps early. I know, because you always get the jumps before the
Yeah.
40s. I know that. I wasn't paying attention enough.
So I'm just
I
assuming that the 3-cone happened before he rolled his ankle. Otherwise, that's some superhuman stuff.
Mason Taylor, though, just looks like a really dependable tight end. I mean, I think that's the story of the position around the league. I don't think there's a whole bunch of game-changing tight ends. There's a whole bunch of, quote, solid, cogent, dependable tight ends, those types of players. I think that's what this draft class is. I think you can get a starter. I think you can get a guy that, can make some kind of impact in the pass game, but there's not a lot of impact 3-down tight ends around the NFL. I'm not sure this class is going to bring a bunch, but they'll bring some starters. I think Taylor's that type of guy. Arroyo's interesting with how fast he looked
Yeah.
at the Senior Bowl, and he might have the most, quote, upside of this entire group.
Jason Taylor's son, of course, Mason Taylor.
Yes. Joy Taylor's nephew, Mason.
NFL bloodlines.
For the SEO. For the
right.
SEO.
No, like Arroyo in particular, I think is a really interesting story because like he wasn't just like his overall college production isn't there, but he did have it, late. Like it wasn't like we never saw it, and we're trying to project a really small sample size in every year forward. He just had a lot of injuries, and then once he got healthy and Cam Ward arrived, suddenly you saw this explosion in production from Arroyo, who then has continued that into the Senior Bowl, into the workouts, and looks. I mean, he legitimately looks like one of the top tight end prospects around. So I'm all for kind of boosting him above where you would have had him before, as long as you're comfortable with, the medical stuff. And that's an internal thing for teams to deal with. Like we just have to guess at. So like, if you assume he's healthy, I mean, he's got a really strong case, I think, to be in that second round range.
All right, let's go to offensive line. We kind of lumped all the offensive linemen in together, and in part because every single one of them is getting mentioned as a guard. Every single tackle might be a guard conversion, so
Great.
why not just lump them all together? Doesn't it make more sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And honestly, we keep bringing this up as a thing, but I genuinely can't ever remember a draft class like that where every single, certainly, I mean, once you get to like guys that are being talked about at the top of the second round, maybe that's fair. Like maybe those guys haven't been talked about as guard converts. But I honestly can't remember a draft where every single top prospect, like the guys that are expected to go high in the first round, each one of them, somebody pretty significant. Like you don't have to go find, the one random guy from a draft site you've never heard of. It's like, well, maybe he projects a guard, but like somebody pretty significant is saying might project better as a guard.
Yeah. And so with Will Campbell at the top, it's because pure arm length. So he's at number 6 on the consensus board from LSU. Wingspan as well. Yeah, it is. It's tight wingspan.
You see Renner's tweet?
I think so. Could you remind me?
Yeah, let me
remind everyone. Let me go through the list here. I'll go through the list while you're looking.
Okay.
Will Campbell's at 6. Texas's Kelvin Banks at 12. The on the rise Missouri tackle Armand Membu at 14. Ohio State's Josh Simmons at 20, and then Alabama's Tyler Booker at 22. Booker's the only pure guard on this list. Simmons is a pure tackle. He's the one guy that's not being mentioned as a potential guard conversion. The top 3 tackles, Campbell, Banks, and Membu, all mentioned as, hey, do I want them at guard? Could they play guard? Those discussions are happening.
And then ironically, you've got Donovan Jackson, the guard, who people are saying maybe he's a tackle.
Yeah.
Anyway, Michael Renner breaking down football biomechanics for people. When projecting to the NFL, ... wingspan is greater than arm length. Wingspan is greater than height. Your sphere of influence on a football field starts at your sternum, not at your shoulder or the tip of your helmet. Tip of your helmet is an unfortunate phrase to throw in there, but we'll let it go.
Really? That's his tweet, huh? Now I got to look at some numbers.
Anyway, so that again takes you all the way back to Will Campbell, who, the arms were concerningly short if you're sort of projecting him to a tackle, but the wingspan would be like historical outlier small. That is Campbell's problem, is not just he's got short arms, but his wingspan is even worse from an NFL offensive tackle point of view than his short arm length.
I can't back that up with numbers. I brought this up in past years. Arm length and wingspan negatively correlate to future production at the tackle position. Negatively correlate. In other words,
as in the shorter your arms, the better, or the longer your arms, the worse you are, is probably the better.
But you need the context there, right?
Of course. This is I wasn't validating it. I was simply explaining.
Right. And I'm going to explain the context there. I call it the LaRaven Clark syndrome, right? LaRaven Clark had like 36-inch arms. In the NFL, is far more likely to take a not so good football player with 35, 36-inch arms and give them an opportunity to play NFL football. They're not going to do that with a guy with 32.5-inch arms and let him play tackle. And so that's why it's negatively correlated. So I wouldn't just use it straight up necessarily. But the other way of viewing this is if you do have short arms, then you probably are special in all these other ways if you have a chance to play tackle. So that's why it's potentially a little skewed. But I also can't find anything that necessarily confirms what Renner's saying. But you have a massive outlier on Will Campbell as far as the wingspan and the arm length. He's a big outlier. And one thing I just want to clarify when we're talking about winners and losers coming out of the combine, because I know we put it out on Twitter, our biggest losers, and Will Campbell was on there. And it's about the context there. He's a loser, quote unquote, in that sense, not because I don't think he's going to be a good player, because there'll at least be some teams that take him off the board as a tackle. And if you lose some of your potential suitors, it hurts your draft stock. That's the thing. And now it only takes one. Maybe the Patriots still love him and he's their tackle one and it doesn't matter. But theoretically, just having a bad arm length and wingspan measurement does potentially hurt your draft stock.
I mean, look, going in, I think there was, the broadcast was talking about it, right? It's like it's a conversation, guard or tackle. With those measurements, I would be surprised if there's anybody willing to give him a shot at tackle, honestly. I think he's now a guard for pretty much everybody. So for that reason alone, I think that's how he goes down as a loser. Here's a fun one, right? Wingspan. Will Campbell's wingspan, 77 1/8 inches at 6'6", right? So tall guy, 77 1/4. Willie Lampkin, who was at 5'10" when he measured at the Senior Bowl, 78 and an eighth inch. He's an inch longer as a wingspan at 5'10", at 8 inches shorter.
Wow. Good for Willie.
And nobody's talking about Willie as a tackle. Willie's a center only, right?
He's the real 5-position player in this draft. Willie Lampkin. Get him out there at tackle. He could do it all. I mean, we're talking about this stuff because the NFL seems to care and it matters and it is interesting. It doesn't necessarily affect the player. I mentioned Will Campbell, though. You know, he's got some rough reps in there against some okay edge rushers. Kyle Kennard from South Carolina, a few others. I still like Will Campbell quite a bit as a player. I think Kelvin Banks can still play tackle. He doesn't have the arm length issues. I think he moves perfectly fine. He's got hand strength. I love Kelvin Banks as a tackle. It's also partly some of the teams that they're being connected to, whether it's the Bears. Before the Bears made all those guard moves, it was like, oh, if they drafted Kelvin Banks, would he play left guard and then eventually take over at tackle? They could still draft him, put him right there at tackle, and bump Braxton Jones. The Niners could draft Kelvin Banks, start him at guard, move him to tackle once Trent Williams, he retires or moves on. Membu, same idea. Like if the Colts take him, does he play guard and eventually take over at tackle? That's why some of those discussions are happening here. Simmons, like I said, is probably the only pure left tackle, but he's coming off the knee injury and only really has about a half year of production, good production at Ohio State. That is a bit of a concern, I think, for a tackle. And then Booker had a terrible workout. And, again, not that the workouts are everything, but he's below this RAS threshold of historic first-round picks. You usually want to see better movement skills from your guards, even though Booker's a pretty good overall player.
Yeah, I mean, his workout looked pretty rough. It was, the numbers were slow, but he also looked just kind of labored and slow. I mean, lumbering was I think a word that would describe him. So yeah, that classic example of like how much do you weigh the sort of the measured athleticism versus the tape, which is pretty good. Simmons is interesting because there was Ian Rappaport had the little propaganda piece on NFL Network where he's like, hey, teams are saying they're not scared of his injury and it's not going to cause his his stock to slide at all. Like they're going to draft him wherever. I mean, the consensus board agrees. 20 overall with that injury suggests most people aren't concerned either.
Yeah, and like I said, I think nobody's going to really project Simmons in at guard. So that's the one thing where maybe he is unique in the sense that that he's a pure left tackle prospect here. Just a couple of other names to mention. I think there's a second wave of tackles right now. It's Josh Connolly Jr. from Oregon at 31, Ariante Ursary from Minnesota at 41. Then there's a bit of a drop off as far as the tackles go. I would keep an eye on Anthony Belton from NC State. He's at 94, a little bit lower, but had a really nice Senior Bowl, improved down the stretch, and he's a monster at left tackle as a developmental guy. And then on the interior, we keep bringing Gray Zabel up. He's getting higher and higher and higher. North Dakota State, guard/center. He's up to 33 on the consensus board. There'll definitely be some teams that, even though he's smaller, look at his athleticism versus Tyler Booker, might want him as a scheme fit, either at center or guard. And Donovan Jackson, who you mentioned, he's up to 35. He's a guard. He's a guard prospect who played tackle the last 7 or 8 games for Ohio State and did a nice job filling in for Josh Simmons. So that versatility plus playing through injury at the combine, I think, another feather in his cap.
Well, that was the thing. You had the kind of gritty part of like, man, that dude looks hampered right now. Like I don't know where it happened, but he looked like he hurt himself. Like they were saying, Charles Davis sidled up to him on the sideline, was like, hey, you okay? He's like, I'm good. But like people were asking him, was he good based off how he was moving around? But before that, he had looked incredibly fluid with his movement. I mean, he did the wave drill looking like a good tackle prospect. The difference again between him and Tyler Booker in moving around before he got hurt looked pretty spectacular. So that was why I was saying you've got this guy who's a guard prospect, but people are asking, could he play tackle at the next level based off playing it already at Ohio State and the fact that he was moving around that well before he got hurt and then, started to look pretty rough by the end of it. So, Jackson's a pretty fascinating prospect because I don't think he is necessarily just a guard.
All right. Anything else on O-line, Sam, before we get to the defensive side of the ball?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Before we get to the defense, though, check the mic is brought to you by our friends over at Timeline to get 10% off your order of MitoPure at timeline.com by using the code Check the Mic at checkout. MitoPure is a supplement that can help you because it encourages cellular renewal. It works by promoting an essential cellular cleanup process that clears out dysfunctional mitochondria, aka your cell's battery packs. There are no supplements on the market that have better clinical research shown to be effective at targeting the effects of age-related cellular decline. With regular use, you'll see and feel the difference in the form of improved energy levels, better workouts, faster recovery, more endurance, and more. In fact, MitoPure is shown to deliver double-digit increases in muscle strength and endurance without a change in exercise. This is your year to be your best, most energized, most revitalized, so you can awaken the strength, power, and resilience already in you with the first and only supplement clinically proven to rejuvenate health at the cellular level. Again, Timeline's offering 10% off your order of MitoPure. You go to timeline.com. That's TIMELINE.com. Use the promo code Check the Mic. All right, Sam, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. And remember, the big story last year was how many offensive players are going to come off the board? How many are coming off the board before we see our first defensive player? And the answer was what, 14, 13 offensive players?
First round.
It was a lot. All 6 quarterbacks, receivers, Brock Bowers at tight end, before we finally saw Laiatu Latu as the top defensive player on the board. That will not be the case this year. We're going to start at the interior of the defensive line, then we'll get to edge, littered with potential first-round prospects. So interior defensive line starts with Mason Graham at number 5 overall from Michigan. Ole Miss's Walter Nolan at number 19. Michigan's Kenneth Grant at 24. Oregon's Derek Harmon at 30. And then Toledo's Darius Alexander making a move, number 5 interior defensive lineman at number 44 overall on the consensus board. It's a good class.
Yeah, I mean Mason Graham, obviously the star of the group, despite weighing in significantly smaller than people that he was listed. I don't know that it was necessarily significantly smaller than people expected him to be, just significantly smaller than Michigan was claiming he was. But Mason Graham's an absolute monster inside. I think he is the clear top guy in this class. I'm not concerned about the size thing because I never really bought into the idea that he was 320 in the first place.
Right.
But this group's good. I mean, that's the overarching theme with this group is forget the gap between Graham and the rest. Like, we've had years where we're like, there might be one defensive tackle that you're going to take in the first couple of rounds. I mean, where Christian Barmore was the one guy in his draft class, right? Where like he's like the only guy he won. This group, though, it's strong, it's deep, it's top heavy as well. Like, there's a ton of guys, you just listed out the rest of them. They're all like fringe first round players, even down as far as Derek Alexander, 44 right now. But that's not a stretch to get him into the first round. And there's a bunch more guys that are like backing that up in the second round as well. And then, further down, like, this is a really strong group.
Yeah, there's a lot of 330 pounders as well. You have Kenneth Grant, who's a monster, and he's of that list that's on the screen there, your closest nose tackle type of prospect, even though he's not necessarily a power player. He has that type of size, but Tyleik Williams from Ohio State has good size. Alfred Collins from Texas, they're 6th and 7th on the consensus board, respectively. You have Deion Walker, who's dropped quite a bit. I mean, again, fringe first rounder, I think, coming into the season from Kentucky. And he's big and, developmental type of player. So there's some size in this class as well. And then you have your undersized pass rushers, TJ Sanders from South Carolina, Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee. There's a good mix of different style players. And even in that top 5, a guy like Derek Harmon, I think he has good size, but probably more of a pass rush specialist than a run stopping type. So you can get some interior pass rush. And here's the thing, Sam. We just saw Osa Odighizuwa make $20 million a year over the next 4 years for the Dallas Cowboys. We think Milton Williams is potentially going to break the bank. If you have a guy like Derek Harmon, who had the most pressures of any interior defensive lineman this year per PFF, and he's at 30, does his value get even higher? Because that position, it's tough to find interior pass rushers right now in today's NFL. And you have a few in this class. Walter Nolan as well, I think, is extremely disruptive. He's at 19 right now. I could see him creeping up closer to the top 10 as long as everything checks out off the field with him. So I could see this class maybe going even higher than some of their consensus rankings right now.
Yeah, and Jordan Reed from ESPN, when we talked to him at the combine, I mean, he was flagging Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee as one of the most underrated like interior players in this draft as well. He's 69 on the consensus board right now, but that classic like second round guy that could be an impact player as well. This is a really good group in a at a position where we've had a lot of drafts where that has not been the case.
So yeah, I mean we're going to talk about edge in a second here, and it's even deeper, I would say, than interior defensive line. This draft will look nothing like last year, where it's all offense. And in the story that we talked about was okay, somebody's going to pick up some good defensive players. Jared Verse went at number 19, the defensive rookie of the year by far. He goes at number 19, I believe it was last year. Jared Verse would be, I mean, we thought he was a top 10 caliber player last year anyway, but he'd be going pretty high in this year's draft where you don't have those high value offensive line positions. These defensive linemen, I think, are going to come off the board pretty quickly. And I'll repeat it again. I think a lot of teams are going to double up, grab a defensive tackle and an edge or two edges. They're going to double up on the defensive line in this class because of all the depth and all of the first and second round caliber players here. So I like the top of this defensive tackle class. And I like the depth with some of those other names that I mentioned as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's go to the edge here. And we've got on the consensus board 5 in the top 16 so far. And there'll be plenty of other names that are worth mentioning as well. Abdul Carter from Penn State at 2. Jalen Walker, calling him an edge here from Georgia at number 11. Georgia's Michael Williams at number 13. Texas A&M's Shamar Stewart at 15. And then Marshall's Mike Green at 16. And there's plenty of other names on the edge that I think are going to be in the first round mix. It is deep. It's loaded. You've got, small guys who can rush the passer. You've got athletic freaks like Shamar Stewart. You have a blue chip prospect that everybody expects Abdul Carter to be. Really nice mix as far as edge rushers go.
Yeah, and that run there of 11, 13, 15, 16, James Pierce Jr. is the next player on the consensus board at 17. So he only just misses out on this top 5. Yeah, I think you've got a ton of edge rusher talent as well. Like it's a really strong draft for the defensive line in general. Now, I think what's interesting with this group is that there's a lot of, I don't know if this is just the way the world is now in college football with the landscape, but there's a lot of sort of projection involved in this group. I mean, Abdul Carter is a guy being talked about as maybe goes number 1 overall in the draft. He played edge rusher basically the first time full time last season. So we're not looking at these guys that have got like a 4-year college career of being productive and consistent, or even 3 years, as an edge rusher. Like Carter was an edge rusher the first time last year full time. Jalen Walker played a legitimate hybrid role, and it's projecting him as a full time edge to the next level. Guys like Mike Green may have the best kind of resume in those terms, but he's dealing with like his issue is off field as well. But like Marshall, right? Like the projection for him is it's a bigger jump in competition than it is for some of these other guys. So I think it's a talented group and it's a really good group, but there's a lot of projection involved with this group of edge rushers.
There is. They are fascinating. I mean, I've called Jalen Walker the most interesting non-Travis Hunter prospect in the draft.
Right.
He's got this past year he rushed the passer 195 times and dropped into coverage 178 times. So that move that you said Abdul Carter made from linebacker to edge this year, Jalen Walker didn't even make that move yet necessarily. He was kind of doing both, and you just don't see those types of splits. You don't see guys go 50-50 essentially rushing the passer and dropping into coverage and then just projecting as pass rushers at the next level.
Yeah, and if you do, it's like it's the way it used to happen with, Von Miller, where he sort of he's like a 2-down linebacker and then goes down, kicks down to the line in obvious pass rushing situations and becomes an edge rusher or a pass rusher. I think you're right. If Travis Hunter wasn't in the draft, I think there would be a much more significant discussion about what Jalen Walker was and could be at the next level, because he was legitimately a hybrid player. By which I mean he was doing he was playing 2 different positions at the same time, where the delineation, like the line between them, was just whatever front Georgia wanted to shift into at a given moment, right? Like he was the linchpin that allowed them to play various different fronts, and he would line up either as an off the ball linebacker, against the run, or who could drop into coverage, or he could sort of shift down into the line of scrimmage, like mug a gap and effectively add a rusher that way, or he would legitimately just line up as an edge rusher and rush the passer as a proper edge rushing / outside linebacker, traditional pass rushing threat. You don't see that. And what's interesting is I can't think of a team that's done much of that really at the NFL level, certainly not for a long time. I mean, people will bring up, Roosevelt Colvin way back in the day, but like in the way the league is going with these Brian Flores type defenses, I do kind of wonder if a team will look at Jalen Walker and say, why not keep him doing this? Why project him as a full-time edge rusher? Why project him as a full-time off the ball linebacker? Why not actually try and make use of a true hybrid player and have him make an impact everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about like if Mike Zimmer was still in Dallas as defensive coordinator, would he be a good, sugar the A gaps linebacker for them? Jalen Walker talking about from Georgia here. Raheem Morris, we've mentioned in the middle of the first round for Atlanta, they need a pure edge rusher, and they'll drop their edge rushers into coverage more than most. Flores, who you mentioned, but I can't see the Vikings spending another first rounder on an edge after they did it with Dallas Turner last year. So it's tough to find those pure fits other than teams that, the Panthers at 8 have been tied to Jalen Walker quite a bit, where they would probably just let him, get after the QB. So, I mean, the other part of Walker is he's under 1,000, and like we said, like in a hybrid role, that is almost unprecedented inexperience for a guy that we're talking about in the top 15. His teammate Michael Williams also under 1,000 snaps. Now he's played pure edge, but he's battled injuries and just doesn't have a ton of experience. So I love this class for the potential, and they're very interesting stories. You throw Shamar Stewart in there, who's, freak athlete at almost 270 pounds. The way he moves, he is in that Trayvon Walker, Rashawn Gary broke the combine type of mold, but certainly doesn't have the pass rush production, but he's a very good run defender. So do you want to take that guy in the top 15? So there are a lot of fascinating edge rushers in this class who have some what ifs in there. And then the guys that aren't even in the top 5 in the consensus so far, a whole bunch of other names I'll mention in a second. I'll let you go.
Well, that 1,000 snaps thing is a really interesting point to bring up, because remember when Jordan Davis was coming out, he had a 4-year college career, but his 4-year career ended up under 1,200 snaps in total. And the question with him was, well, okay, how many snaps are you going to get out of him the next level? This is a freaky level of inexperience, right? Now, it was a different question because it was like, we know he can play. It's just we don't know at 345 pounds, how many snaps can you get out of him at the next level? And is that the limiting factor to taking him high? But like his level of snaps was seen as like, this is a wild level of lack of playing time. These guys we're talking about have played fewer snaps than him, and we're trying to project them forward to like a full-time role where you might have to play the guts of 1,000 snaps in a single season, let alone over 3-4 years. Like it is again, this entire group has just got some massive level of projection involved, whether it's position switches, whether it's lack of experience at one position, whether it's lack of experience, period, or whether it's, small school, whatever. Again, I like the talent, but every one of these guys seemingly has got a fairly unusual volume of projection involved.
Again, we're going through the consensus board, NFL mock draft database.com. This is, accumulating all of the various big boards from around the interwebs and putting them into one, kind of understand where the market is on these players and see player movement. The other interesting names beyond the top 5 that are listed here, you mentioned James Pierce Jr. He's at 17 overall on the big board, 6th among edge rushers. A little bit of a drop off to number 32, which is Nick Scourton from Texas A&M. Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College is at number 36 overall. I do think he sneaks into the first round or becomes a very good second round pass rusher. Jack Sawyer, your productive Ohio State player, Landon Jackson, who just tore up the combine with his explosiveness, and he's got some really good power. And then you have, designated pass rush types like Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss via Florida. I mean, there's still some very good players, I think, in this edge rush group. You throw in a guy like Kyle Kennard, who's a fifth-year breakout for South Carolina, but was one of the most effective pass rushers in the SEC this year. He's at number 71. I think there's even guys down at Josiah Stewart at 80 from Michigan, little undersized, but very good pass rusher last year for Michigan. So I think there's still some players in the second and third wave of edge rushers that could be effective players at the next level.
Yeah, and I wonder, because of all the projection involved, we talked about these guys. I wonder if some other of these guys with a more extensive resume are going to get boosted up. Like I don't know how many teams think this way, but I'm sure there's a couple of teams that would covet that experience and data set and volume and just the greater sample size overall in a year where there's so much projection. I wonder if you're going to see one or two of those guys get boosted up because they're the sort of the relative sure things, even if in abstract terms they're not as talented.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see what teams value, because again, Michael Williams and Jalen Walker, you could see all the potential. You could put together the highlight reel of their best 8 or 10 and say, okay, I get it. These guys are top 5 caliber players, but you just don't have the same data sample. We know that data is a lot more prevalent in NFL front offices than it was 10 to 15 years ago. It's going to be interesting to see what teams value. Essentially, a little bit of upside versus, like you said, more of a sure thing with a bigger sample size. So I love the edge class, even going down to like David Walker from Central Arkansas, those types of players. He's at 127. That's probably 20th among all the edges right now. Some players to be had here, even I think into day 3 on the edge, who might have some upside. So it's a good year to double, maybe triple up on the defensive line, whether it's interior or on the edge. Let's go to linebacker. I did see some chat about Jihad Campbell. He's the number 1 linebacker here, that maybe he's one of those guys that could rush the passer. I'm not sold on that as far as pure pass rusher off the edge, but he's the top linebacker prospect at number 27. Carson Schwessinger from UCLA at number 61. Demetrius Knight from South Carolina at 77. Barrett Carter from Clemson at 97. And Ole Miss's Chris Paul Jr. at 107. So the key here is we're listing the top 5 linebackers on the consensus board. Only one in the first round range. That's Campbell from Alabama, Schwessinger and Knight, UCLA and South Carolina, in that second round range, but not a ton, right? Not a ton of linebackers here expected to go in the first couple rounds.
Yeah, Schwessinger in particular, though, I was one of these guys where he did like the reverse Mason Graham. Like he rocked up at the combine 20 pounds heavier than he was listed at in college, and wasn't a bad weight. Like he ran well, tested well, jumped, I think had the second highest vertical jump of any linebacker at the combine as well. So like I think was somebody that probably helped the stock with the combine by being like, no, this is not an undersized quote unquote linebacker. This is like prototypical NFL size, who also has a 39.5-inch vertical jump and can move.
Yeah, and he only had 101 career snaps heading into 2024. So we're talking about these Georgia guys being under 1,000. Schwessinger's at 800, just over 800, almost hardly even played college football heading into this year. And he had a great season for UCLA. You could kind of see that athleticism. He did back it up at the combine. So I think him and Campbell, I think he ends up going closer to Campbell for linebacker needy teams, maybe in the second round. They're both athletic. I think they're both capable in coverage. Again, I think a lot of people looked at Campbell and his athleticism and say he could rush off the edge. I repeat all the time that it's a lot different to go, win against a tackle one-on-one, because you need a full move set. You need enough power to threaten them. You need enough burst to threaten the edge. I don't know if Campbell has all of that skill set, but I think he's a good blitzer, has a chance to be a good blitzer, and plays the run pretty well. So I like those two guys as the top 2 linebacker prospects where they are.
Would you, if you're GM Steve, would you have Jalen Walker ranked in the linebacker group at all, or do you just project him as an edge?
I would probably project him as an edge. Again, I think scheme stuff's overrated, but I would have to. That's one you have to defer to your defensive coordinator in usage, right? So if Raheem Morris, if I had his system, or if I had the Rams system, I would say, okay, this is an edge where I might bump Walker up a little bit, because I know that we tend to drop guys into coverage 100, 150 times a year. And not many of these edges can do that. I don't see Michael Williams doing that. I don't see Shamar Stewart doing that. I see Walker being able to do that. So GM Steve's going to actually consult with his defensive coordinator on that one. I probably won't put Walker as a linebacker, because I think he's good in coverage, but inexperienced. Like he doesn't see routes extremely well. He doesn't have a good feel for that. He's got this, I can play curl flat, I can come up and make a tackle, but I don't want to like throw him out there into coverage for 350 snaps. So I don't have Jalen Walker as a pure linebacker. He would have to be more of a pass rusher for me.
But that's the thing. Like, I think he showed the traits that he could do it, and it's like almost all of his worst plays come at linebacker. But
Yeah.
when we're talking about a guy that's played, barely 1,000 snaps total, 300 or whatever as like a proper off the ball linebacker. And it's like, I mean, last year, sorry, 300, like maybe 400 or 500 total in his career. I mean, that's a freaky small sample size to be dealing with. Like, so you would kind of expect a lot of bad mental mistakes effectively. Like, I saw a bunch of plays where, he's chasing a wide run and sort of jumps into the wrong gap effectively, tries to do too much or tries to do somebody else's job instead of just doing what he's supposed to do, flow over the top, cut it off, those kinds of things. Or like a goof in coverage where he's not like doesn't pick up the right route or whatever. But like for a guy that's basically played 300 snaps at that position, I would kind of expect that against, SEC competition, like high end college offenses. Now, does that mean you've got work on your hands if you want to make him an NFL linebacker? Absolutely. But I don't think it necessarily means he can't do it. It's just like he's so inexperienced at that.
I've never seen somebody that's that inexperienced at two positions that he could project at. That's why I love Jalen Walker as a fascinating prospect, because I could see teams loving him as a linebacker, loving him as an edge. I see Drake in the chat saying he's a pure 3-4 outside linebacker, but that's less of an actual position in today's NFL because you're playing nickel 60-70% of the time. So it's still more of a pass rush type of role. But I am fascinated by how many teams would use a Jalen Walker game plan wise to take away a Lamar Jackson, right? He's awesome at playing the spy role. He is outstanding at that. His key play is him tracking down Arch Manning, right? He could do that great. It's just not an every down role, but it's a game plan oriented role that I would love to have on my team if I'm say the Bills trying to beat Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and some of the mobile quarterbacks in the NFL.
But here's the thing. Like, I also think I don't necessarily agree with that idea that he's like a prototypical 3-4 outside linebacker, because I think he's already shown a capacity to play as a 4-3 off the ball linebacker in a way that's the everyone you can think of as a classic 3-4 outside linebacker prototype could not do, right? Jason Taylor couldn't do some of the things that Jalen Walker has on tape last year playing off the ball linebacker. Like, Jason Taylor would be classic 3-4 outside linebacker prototype back in the day, long edge rusher. The Lamar Woodley. These guys, like these classic 3-4 outside linebacker pass rushers, could not do the things that Walker was doing in coverage last year as a true off the ball linebacker. So I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, I think we think of like 3-4 outside linebacker now as this classic halfway house between pass rusher and linebacker, and it is to a degree. And that's why, a Dallas Turner sort of fit into that role, right? Because you're going to want to drop him into coverage a bit, like TJ Watt drops into coverage more than Myles Garrett. But he isn't just dropping into coverage as in, let's just have him occupy a curl flat over here on the side. He's playing true coverage linebacker on plays where you might want him turning and running on a deep over, 35 yards downfield. That's not what a 3-4 outside linebacker does.
I just want to answer the question in the chat again about Jahad Campbell from Alabama. I don't see him as a third down pass rusher. I just don't, as an edge rusher. I just don't see that in his game. I don't think he's got that type of power. I mentioned this a little while ago, but I just don't see that type of threaten the tackle with power enough to be a pure edge. It's a different skill set.
He's a blitzer,
winning one-on-one against the tackle versus blitzing. What are you saying?
Yeah, he's a blitzer, not a pass rusher.
Blitzer, not a pass rusher, right? And I learned that years ago, and it was the way it was positioned to me was clear and just made a lot of sense to me. And I think I like to reiterate that the difference between a blitzer that's about timing, winning one-on-ones against backs, versus winning one-on-ones against tackles and guards when you stunt, that type of thing. So I don't see that from Campbell, but I think he's a 3-down linebacker that can definitely get after the quarterback as a blitzer. All right, let's go to corner. We put Travis Hunter here as well as the top corner at number 3. Will Johnson from Michigan at number 9. Jahdae Barron from Texas at number 21, Chavon Ravel from East Carolina at number 36, and Notre Dame's Benjamin Morrison at number 38. The most interesting thing about this list is that Will Johnson, Chavon Ravel, and Benjamin Morrison all got injured during the season, missed the end of the 2024 season, and at some point they were all mentioned as far as the top 15 goes. Will Johnson's still there, but they were all mentioned as top 15 prospects. If you look at the consensus board, Ravel and Morrison were up. They peaked at number 18 overall on the consensus board. So these guys that have battled injury have been discussed going much higher. And I think that's what makes this cornerback class maybe sneaky good.
Yeah, and then even again, it's like where the next guys come up as well, and almost all the next guys are like immediately following on from Ravel and Morrison. Maxwell Hairston, the Kentucky corner with the amazing combine performance, is next up, literally at number 40. Thomas from Florida State is up at 43. Trey Amos from Mississippi, from Ole Miss. I keep reading out Mississippi because everywhere doesn't they write it out instead of just putting Ole Miss the way everyone else.
Your brain has to say Ole Miss, right? You have to convert it on the fly here, Sam.
Right. Trey Amos from Ole Miss at 49. Yeah. Darian Porter, the Iowa State corner, who again had an amazing combine at 55. So that like next group of 5 is hot on the heels of the first group of 5.
I think when you combine, I think it's a sneaky good corner class. I think there are those buy low opportunities here because of the injuries. That second wave that you just mentioned, I think a lot of those guys have potential. Azariah Thomas from Florida State, long man corner type of player. Maxwell Hairston, I know there's some off-field stuff that came up within the last week, but had that really good combine and size. Darian Porter with his size and movement skills. So a lot of these guys have specific skills I think that are worth buying on day 2. And then you have the free agent class there are starters out there in the free agent class. I think it's a good year to potentially reshape the secondary. Your Carlton Davises and DJ Reed and Travarius Ward. So over these next few weeks, free agency will affect this. Some teams will fill some of those corner needs, but if you go into the draft with a corner need, I think they've got a lot of different types of players that can contribute.
Yeah, and there's quite a few teams that need like significant corner influx, whether it's both starters, one starter. There's a lot of teams out there needing cornerback 2. So between free agency and the draft, I think you're going to see a lot of these guys playing next year.
Do you have any strong takes on Travis Hunter, the corner, and how you would play him, what his best fit is, and where is he the clear top corner in the class, do you think, or do you think it's actually closer to the rest of the pack if you're just looking at that position?
I don't think he's the clear top corner, and I think it does depend what scheme you're playing. Corner is the position where I think the two-way thing hurt him the most. Like, you can, there's so many more plays on, like, if you're tired on a snap, a wide receiver, most of the time it's not really a problem because the chances are the ball's not coming your way, or if it comes your way, you can still make the catch, blah, blah, blah. If you're tired at corner, you can get wrecked. And then that play is a highlight in the wrong direction. Right. So I think problem in 2023 where he got absolutely destroyed by Stanford, basically because he was tired the entire time. I think in 2024, he got better at dealing with it. And I don't know if the stamina ticked up or he just figured out ways around it, but he didn't get exposed as much for being fatigued. But I think you could still see it sometimes. And in particular, I think that hurts when you're playing man coverage. Again, zone
you're chasing dudes around, quite a bit.
Yeah. And you've got to be like 100% right from the snap. You can't, loaf into it because you're tired and then accelerate when you need to. Like you can do that a little bit with zone. You can just sort of cheat the drop a bit. You can, your eyes are on the quarterback. You can kind of take it easy until you need to accelerate. Now he has maybe the best acceleration and burst to the ball I've ever seen from a corner. Like when he does stick his foot in the ground and decide I got to close the gap and break on this football, it's nuts the ground he can cover. Like, so I think you look at this and you say, as a zone corner, he is freaky good. And I don't think rate him as highly as a man cover corner, but I don't know that necessarily means he can't do that. I think that's just the area that you would expect to be hurt first by this two-way fatigue stamina thing, right? So again, my question, if I'm a scout or if I'm in these draft meeting rooms, is if I took all of his wide receiver snaps off the table, what do you think happens to his man cover snaps, right? If you think it stays the same, then fine. I think he's a good zone cover corner. If I'm playing a man cover scheme, maybe I want somebody else. But I think there's a pretty good argument that if you take away all those wide receiver snaps, he immediately becomes a better man cover corner. And then he might be comfortably the best corner in this draft, regardless of the scheme you're playing.
Yeah, I think Hunter as a zone corner, and we've talked about this a lot, Sam, right? Like, it's not a knock to say a guy's great at playing zone or a zone corner or whatever it is. And you're right. And I might only be saying this because I remember Alec Aomenor from Stanford taking advantage of a tired Travis Hunter, right? I remember those plays, but I think Hunter is the type of guy with his ball skills. He can have one of those 6 to 8 interception seasons, like a Xavier Howard type of season where Trayvon Diggs, like those high turnover seasons. That's part of the reason why I'm more intrigued by, I want Hunter as a corner that dabbles at receiver. Even if he is the best receiver, I think he's going to have one of those years where he's just a turnover machine because of his ball skills, feel for the game, and his ability to break on the ball. So that's where I'm intrigued by Hunter as a corner. And then I also have it in my mind, okay, well, what if I only needed him for man coverage 20 to 25 times? What if I did play him at receiver? You get some snaps off on offense anyway. And then I just said, hey, go cover this guy on third down. And that's it. 25 times a game. Like, there's so much game plan flexibility. So I'm going to continue to buy into Hunter, the two-way player, and think of the many ways that I could use him, because I do think he could play enough man. I think he could be a turnover machine as a zone corner, and I think he could be an impact wide receiver. And, that's it, man. I'm intrigued by figuring out a way to make that all work.
I mean, his ball skills on either side are nuts, right? He's got amazing hands. I think he's got like 3 drops in his career as a receiver, and then his ball skills at cornerback are similarly freaky. I mean, look, not to compare my glorious Hall of Fame now IAFL career.
Yeah, you can do it. You're a Hall of Famer. You're a Hall of Famer.
I have also played both sides of the ball, and I didn't like. I was okay catching it, but I didn't love, like, personally, I didn't have the confidence that my hands were good enough to play offense. Right? It was never a problem, but I would drop some passes that would frustrate me, let alone anybody else. So, but I found the second I went to the defensive side and the balls that were thrown in the air were not intended for me, they were dramatically easier to catch. Like the second it's just a bonus. If you catch the ball, it's so much easier to pluck it out of the sky than it is when you're supposed to catch it. So, and I feel like you get the same thing with Hunter. Like, when that ball is in the air, like, he gets that boost of like, I can just go get this. It's not intended for me, but I can just, like, it's there. I'm going to go snag it. Like, his ball skills for either position, I think, are absolutely crazy. And he has that ability, I think, that spatial awareness, the understanding of where the ball is going to be, and his ability to cover ground when it's in the air is crazy. So, who was it? Who was the corner that used to keep showing up like on the wrong side of the formation, making plays constantly, like would break from the backside on cover 3 all the time? Oh, I'm trying to think who that was in the NFL. It's not like
Peters?
Yes.
Marcus Peters?
He has that vision ability in addition to the ball skills thing. Like, that's the kind of season I think it's not going to be a Trayvon Diggs or a Xavier Howard type of season where they get a ton of interceptions because they're just really good at the catch point. It's going to be a Marcus Peters kind of interception leading season where there's a bunch of plays where it's like, what the hell was he doing there? He wasn't supposed to be there, but he has that vision.
And he's got those instincts, Hunter. He has those instincts while playing offense the entire time too.
Yeah.
And having to be on offense while the defense is making adjustments. And, we've heard, obviously, that Colorado had specific plans for him. Like, they had somebody in his ear talking about defensive adjustments and making sure that he was prepared. But he sees the game extremely well, is the point that you're making. And again, that's why I have confidence in him being successful at the next level. Let me just add one more thing to the two-way thing with Hunter. The Shohei Ohtani thing is fascinating because if you just isolated one side of the ball, he's an MVP candidate on both sides. If Hunter was just solid, cogent, dependable, if he was just pretty good at 2 different positions, I find that extremely valuable, right? If he was just a serviceable starter at 2 positions, there's a ton of value there. So that's just another way I think you can recoup that value from Hunter. Even if he's not special, if he's given you 1.5 players, that's unique and something that I think is worth looking at. So there's a lot of ways that we've discussed where the Hunter pick is worth it, right? He busts at one position, but he's good at the other. He literally plays two positions. He's only pretty good at both positions. He fills two different depth chart spots depending on injury. I think there's a lot of ways that Hunter adds a ton of value to the team.
I mean, that was the argument for his Heisman, right? Like I don't think he was the best receiver or cornerback in the nation, but he was top 5 at both at the same
Right.
time. And that is historically freaky. So that makes him the best player in college football because he's a top 5 guy at 2 separate positions on either side of the ball. And that's ridiculous. So I agree. Like you don't need him to be the best player in the league at either spot if you can lean into playing him 2 ways at a fairly significant clip. But the interesting thing to me is I think a lot of teams are weighing that question, right? Can we play him enough at both sides of the ball so that if he's serviceable at both, we get like 1.5 players worth of value, and that's incredibly useful, right? Or what if we only play him at one and he actually ends up as like a top 5 player at that position? Like which one of those is more valuable? Which I don't know what the answer to that question is, right? If you have an average player at corner and receiver at the same time versus, let's say, he's CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver, right? Like which is more valuable, average at 2 or CeeDee Lamb at 1? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, with roster constrictions and restrictions and everything, I mean, you can make the case for both. I want to touch on Jahdae Barron again. I think we've hyped him up quite a bit on this show. I mean, he made one of the plays. I have a soft spot, Sam. The one play, my favorite play in football is when the corner replaces the free safety and picks it off, right? So the free safety will bite on purpose, will bite on a crosser, and then the backside corner's got to replace him, play free safety from the other side of the field, and try to like rob a post route. Jahdae Barron made an interception on that play. So that's like the first tick box for me. But I wrote down in my notes, Trent McDuffie and Mike Sanders-Still vibes, the way he flies around the field, has the ability to play inside and out. Want that dude on my team, ran fast at the combine to just kind of like tick that box as well. So I think Barron on his way up, currently at 21 on the consensus board. He was already just in the 30s a couple weeks ago. He might be creeping into the top 15.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fascinating guy. So we talked about the edge rushers and how few snaps they have at various different things and the inexperience. Barron's a guy that's played like 900 snaps in the slot, like 1,000 snaps at outside corner, and a bunch of box safety as well. Like he's played every spot in the secondary all over the place a lot. Like you have an insane volume of evidence that he can be really good doing anything you want him to do in the secondary. Then he rocked up to the combine and ran, like a 4.4 flat. So we're not talking about somebody like Brian Branch who could do everything at Alabama, but then runs a 4.59 or something. And you're like, that's not really going to fly outside a cornerback in the NFL. Now we're restricting him only to the slot or at safety. The only thing that says that is not like ticking every box in terms of you can literally play him at every spot in your secondary is he had short arms, right? And so if you run a press man scheme, maybe you don't want him as your outside cornerback. But outside of that, every box is ticked to play every position in the secondary for any team in the NFL this year. That's like a freakish level of versatility that almost no defensive back is bringing to the table.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Barron. Want that dude on my team. Keep an eye on Chavon Ravel from East Carolina as well. Before his injury, press man ability, moves extremely well. Again, I think the cornerback class is sneaky good, both at the top and some of the depth a little bit later on. One more position to touch on. It's safety. We're going through the consensus board. It's NFLmockdraftdatabase.com. These aren't our rankings. Don't blame us. This isn't Check the Mike rankings. This is the people. This is what the consensus is saying. Georgia's Malachi Starks at number 18 overall. Nicky Manwari up to 29 from South Carolina after his freakish combine. Notre Dame's Xavier Watts at 66. Texas's Andrew Makuba at number 92. Texas via Clemson. And then Penn State's Kevin Winston Jr., injured for most of the 2024 season, still the number 5 safety right now per the consensus board at number 98. Starks and Eamon do look like the two that can go in the first round. We'll see what happens with Starks. I think a lot of people like him just as a pure football player, moves well enough, had some ups and downs, I think, at Georgia where he looked great early in his career, but has some ugly plays in there. Had an extensive role at Georgia as well, had to cover the slot, had to play true safety. And then Eamon just broke the combine, and I think we're going to start hearing more and more about him going in the top 15 or 20. Again, it depends. The positional value thing is the only thing that I think keeps Eamon lower. When teams weigh the depth of interior defensive line and edge players versus drafting a safety, even a guy with all of Eamon skills, that's the only thing that I think might drop him as far as draft status goes.
I think I'm starting to feel about the positional value thing the way I feel about the kind of trading down and blue chip stuff. Like once you get beyond whoever you're terming a blue chip player, I almost feel like all bets are off at that point. Like, would you do you draft a safety or a tight end or one of these non-valuable positions in like the top 5 when you're passing up on a potential blue chip edge rusher or a wide receiver or whatever? No. Do you not draft a guy like 25 in the first round because it's not a value position and you can get those guys later? I say to hell with it. Like at that point, just draft who you think the best player is. And I'm not reaching to get an edge rusher or an offensive tackle or whatever when I think there's a better player there just because the better player plays safety or tight end.
I think Eamon he is a fascinating player, though. I think he's very good. I think he's a good player. He's a good player. Plus, he has the athleticism. The way he could break on the ball, his closing speed shows up on film. He's made a lot of plays on the ball. Much like Malachi Starks, I think a lot of their ugly plays are just playing pure free safety. And I know people like Starks as a pure free safety as well because of the way he attacks the ball in the air. But safety's to me, it's not about the highlight reel plays. It's about being in position more often than not. I think both of those guys kind of struggle at times playing deep safety, but in and around the box, Eamon can be a special player. Starks, I think his ability to maybe man up against some tight ends and move around a little bit. He's got the ability to be one of those game plan oriented, game specific type of players that can add a lot to a defense as well. But I don't know, like if you're just looking for like the pure in the right place at the right time free safety, you're dropping down to the third guy, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, who's not as good of an athlete as those other guys, but always had that Ed Reed nose for the ball. Ball's going to find him. Kirby Joseph is more recent comp maybe for Xavier Watts, ball magnet type, but not as freaky athletic as some of those guys at the top.
Would you put Barron into the safety list as well? Because, I mean, again, I think he can play every spot in the secondary. So I would at least rank him in the safety rankings as well, even if I plan to play him at a more valuable position to start with.
Then he's first there, too, if we're just ranking safeties. Yeah, I mean,
right.
I don't think he's a safety. I'd play him at corner, but honestly, I think he could do it all the same way you loved Brian Branch. I mean, we both loved Brian Branch a couple of years ago. Safety that plays nickel and does it all. I mean, if you want to call Barron a safety, yeah, I think he'd be the top guy. I just want that dude on my team.
I mean, I think most people are going to give him, they're going to want him at corner before they want him at safety. But I think we're in that category where, like you said, he would be the best safety in this draft if you want him to play there. So I think just for that sake, you should be talking about him in these rankings as, he should be he would be the top guy on this ranking board.
The other guys to mention, as I said, Makuba, the fourth guy on the board here, productive career at 2 different places. And then Winston, I think it was week 2 that he got hurt this past year at Penn State. Really high PFF grade coming into the year. And, for a guy coming off injury, he was expected to go a lot higher. So if you're looking for sleeper safety prospect, a guy like Winston is up there. I think there's some other useful players a little bit lower down the list as well. And so maybe better safety depth this year than we've seen. I think that's this class, though, Sam, right? There's depth. There's players in the hundreds at corner, at safety, edge, defensive tackle that could be contributors. So I think at the end of the day, a couple of years down the road, we're going to see players, maybe even more players in the 4th and 5th round that are contributing than we've seen in past years, even if it's not a top-heavy draft.
Yeah, like it kind of felt like people were a little bit down on this class overall, like the level of ability, the talent in it. I think it is a pretty good draft. Maybe it's just again that like range in the first round where I think people tend to judge how good a draft is. Like it's not necessarily incredibly good there, but there's a ton of like good players that are going to be available Like if I had a ton of draft picks in day 2, I'd be ecstatic in this draft.
Yeah, I agree, man. So this isn't, again, we're going through the consensus board, kind of understanding where the market is right now. These we call these early position rankings right now. It's early March. You and I are going to go through a lot more film in the coming weeks and kind of have isolated shows. Maybe not in every position group. I don't know if you guys want to see a linebacker ranking show or not, but we'll hit on the biggest position groups, especially defensive line. We'll do our receiver rankings, running backs, quarterbacks. We'll do the whole thing. So we'll do our top 10s in the coming weeks, but I think it's always good to see what the market is saying essentially for these players. And NFLmockdraftdatabase.com, just a good place to see the market, see things changing, see perception change, essentially day to day and on the fly when it comes to the NFL draft class. Anything else you want to cover here, Sam, before free agency starts this weekend?
That's it.
Did
it in under 2 hours.
We did. Remind me again. Do we start to hear rumblings on Sunday? Because remember, it used to be nothing happens until Wednesday.
Right.
That's the beginning of the league year. 4:00 Wednesday, all hell breaks loose. But you would start to hear some rumors, pretty strong rumors on Monday. And then they just allowed all of it to happen on Monday. But now I can't remember if we start to hear stuff on Sunday, like if it just gets earlier and earlier.
Yeah. I mean, we moved the legal tampering period because that was happening anyway. And it became an absolute joke that like the second the clock went, noon on the official opening, like every move got announced. So we already knew about. So they moved the legal tampering period to make that kind of, it's kosher now. You're allowed to talk during this period. But yeah, like it's been happening. I mean, the conversations have been getting had since before the combine. Like a ton of this business kind of gets done at the combine. So this idea that like everyone's sitting on their powder doing nothing until the legal tampering period starts on Monday is silly. Like you're going to hear stuff leaking out over the weekend before the legal period starts.
Also, we were just in Indy all last week, and the entire week is NFL executives sitting down with agents, and they're not just,
that's what I'm saying.
They're not just eating steaks. They're talking about their pending free agents. Let's answer one question from the chat. Morgan Workman says, Steve and Sam, who were your biggest draft misses? And there's that one clear name that comes to mind for me, which was Vernon Hargreaves. Vernon Hargreaves the third, coming out of Florida, seemingly ticked every box. He was productive, athletic, he had a weird combine. We always reference like weighed in like 20 pounds heavier than he looked like he should, but he ticked every box. Coach's son, 3 years of production, and then he was just not good at the NFL level across multiple teams, across every role. To me, that was like the biggest one where I felt really good about Vernon Hargreaves coming out, and he just didn't even have one good season, I don't think, in his entire NFL career.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton, obviously, like even just recent history with the receivers like Jonathan Mingo. I really liked. I don't think he's had necessarily the best role to be in, but he's done nothing so far in the NFL. I think the one that irritates me the most though is I saw the numbers again recently. Matt Jones should have been amazing and wasn't. Like Matt Jones, the old Arkansas quarterback who then became a wide receiver for Jacksonville, 6'6", 240 pounds with like a freakish 6'6" 3-cone and a 4.4 40 and like ball skills. That guy should have been a great wide receiver and wasn't ever. That one annoys me.
Was that a miss for you though? Like you?
Yeah, I expected him to be really good.
That was 2005.
Right.
You're going back to 2005 for this. By the way, Matt Jones. So, I was a Jags fan at the time, so I'm intimately familiar with Matt Jones' game. He never looked fast on the football field.
I know. It looked like build-up speed.
Right. But in 2007, the Jags made a run. They were pretty good. They had a really good season. In 2007, he became a really good possession receiver. Like he could catch slants and little short posts, little glance routes. He could do that. He became a big-bodied,
pretty useful possession guy.
A big-bodied possession receiver, but never a deep threat. And they tried to make him deep threat. He just didn't have great ball skills because, well, he was converting from quarterback, and he never converted to having those types of ball skills. The one other Matt Jones story that I'll bring up, his first game in 2005 against the Seahawks, they used him on direct snaps. They used him on 5 or 6 different trick plays, and then like never again. It was like they unloaded the Matt Jones trick play playbook week 1 and then never tapped into it again because, just it wasn't really working all that much. So then he just kind of morphed into decent possession receiver who then had some off-field issues and career. Bye-bye. Yeah. Anyway, good times, good discussions. So next week we'll have our mock draft Monday. And then you got to be right here on the YouTube channel ready. I mean, you got to be subscribed. You got to have the bell ready. We could go live at any time. We'll have instant reactions to all the big news. We could go live later today, tomorrow, or this weekend if the big news drops. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Check the mic YouTube channel. If you're listening in podcast land, you'll get your usual Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday next week. But if you want the extra, you want the bonus instant reactions, you got to be on the YouTube channel. So hit the subscribe, hit the bell, hit the thumbs up on the way out. Do all the things. Appreciate everybody for tuning in today. We'll see you again on Monday with more Check the Mic.